welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we pick up here talking about the NBA Finals, and there were some interesting comments made from the Celtics over the weekend about the current situation that they're in. Now, the first couple of quotes that came across my timeline were from Sam Hauser and Payton Pritchard, where Hauser said, quote, "It would be awesome to get it done. It would be great in regards to winning Game 5. But, quote, if we do lose, it's not like it's the end of the world. We'd still be up 3-2. And then Payton Pritchard similarly made a comment of, we really want to win the next game, but if we don't, it's not the end of the world. We have 3 more rounds to go. So, interesting that first off, and at this point we're talking about a couple role players, obviously guys that are in the rotation for the Celtics, but these guys speaking out loud using the same terminology. And then we had Jayson Tatum make very similar comments as well, saying that for the Celtics, losing Game 5 isn't the end of the world, and how much that they would really like to go out and win it at home. And Sam Hauser added to his quote as well that it would be special to win at home. But the fact that, you have these guys that are all it's clear the fact that the Tatum quote exactly was, we would love to win tomorrow. He was asked about this on Sunday. But if it doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. So that's 3 players saying the same thing, it's not the end of the world. So to me, I at least interpret that as this is clearly a conversation that they've all had, that this is a little bit of a shared perspective amongst the team. If, they're all using the exact same terms, essentially. And it does feel like there's been a little bit of an energy shift from after Game 3, where they were saying more so of the right things, where I believe Jaylen Brown specifically said the job isn't done yet, as much as it's nice being up 3-0. And Jayson Tatum added to the fact that in the 2023 playoffs, the Celtics were down 0-3 to the Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals, and that he and the team felt like if Tatum didn't roll his ankle in the first minute or two of that Game 7 matchup, that they would have been the first team to ever pull off the comeback. So it's interesting depending on how you want to interpret all of this, because at the end of the day, it's not the worst thing in the world that the Celtics are currently feeling some level of calmness to it, that it is almost business as usual, and that they're not overreacting to what was an absolutely abysmal loss on Friday, where it was abysmal in terms of their performance. Ultimately, again, like all the things we highlighted during that first segment, we talked about the fact that it's just a very clear difference in desperation between the Mavericks and the Celtics, given the scenarios that baked into that Game 4 matchup. When it was in Dallas, they had everything to lose. The Celtics, I wouldn't say quite nothing to lose, but to some degree as well, they were never going to feel the same level of urgency as the Mavericks were feeling in that matchup. So, it's good that the Celtics aren't overreacting, and it doesn't seem like they're going to change their approach, because ultimately I do feel like, outside of making sure to work a little bit harder on the glass, not allowing the Mavericks to have these second chance opportunities, they just missed their open looks. And the fact that they turned the ball over definitely too much in this game as well, which is something we didn't highlight earlier in the recap. But a lot of what they have done to this point is why they feel like they can win this game. And that's included in the fact that they haven't had their hot 3-point shooting game yet, which feels like it should be coming at some point. Now, it's interesting, the longer this goes on, the more you do sort of question whether or not it is going to, come into play. But ultimately, the Celtics shouldn't overreact to one game where they have lost just 3 games in, call it almost 4 full rounds. Obviously, still have to finish this one off, but they've been incredible during the entire regular season, and so far in the postseason, it has been a pretty dominant showing for them. So they shouldn't be looking to change everything, but again, the fact that they're all talking out publicly about how it's not that big of a deal if they end up losing this game is interesting. I just don't know why you necessarily put yourself into that position. Now, obviously, you're being asked questions from the media. You are going to answer them. But it just feels a little bit strange, I feel like, to come out to the public and sort of be so nonchalant about the way that the rest of this series can go. And it sort of makes me think about the fact that Joe Mazzulla, of course, the head coach of the Boston Celtics, he's a pretty interesting guy where obviously, if you've seen any of his interviews, he's got his own sort of unorthodox, you could say, mannerisms and such, but I do feel like he has continued to improve as a coach from the fact that just flat out he was nowhere near as good last season as he is this year. So he's grown a bunch, but it's interesting to see, the way that he has some of his philosophies and such. And a quote that it feels like some of the Celtics players sort of poke at him a little bit for is this idea that he has reiterated on a number of times, which is the closer you are to winning, the closer you are to losing. And the interpretation of that is that the more comfortable you are because of being up in a series, the more you sort of lose your focus and you become more vulnerable to lose. And that's something that Mazzulla was talking about a little bit as well during Game 3, where the Celtics ended up building up this 21-point fourth quarter lead and almost, letting it completely slip through up until Luka ends up fouling out. So you can definitely make an argument that this could very easily be an even series. And even if you go to Game 2, I thought that there were a lot of opportunities for the Mavericks to win that game as well. And ultimately here, for the Celtics, it's just extremely important for them, especially for this team, that ultimately, again, they have been in this position of sorts on the bigger stages, second time in the finals, but have been to the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 of the last 8 years, where they understand the idea of pressure from the media, from the fans, all of it. And I just feel like it's kind of setting themselves up for a level of scrutiny a little bit, just being, again, so sort of dismissive of the pressure that's currently surrounding them. And again, you want to play loose. You don't want to, tighten up and end up hurting yourself in that sense. We saw the Golden State Warriors when they beat the Celtics in the 2022 finals after they were down in a series, and they were pretty much unbothered by the Celtics going up 2-1 in that series. They were laughing, joking around at shoot-arounds, and they were just mentally the more experienced, more mature team for the instance. And also, I feel that the Celtics are just a better team than the Mavericks, that ultimately, if talent is going to play out here. Now, Luka's the best player in the series, which is why it does sort of also feel like, if Tatum were seen to be in that top 3 grouping, that it would be something where you feel like, okay, Tatum's just going to have one of those games and lift the team. It doesn't really feel like he is on that, absolute, one tier, where he is a little bit more towards the second tier of really, really incredible players, all NBA caliber players, making first teams and such. But it's not quite as easy for him to necessarily elevate the Celtics to where he can just get to his spots. He can, get hot from 3, and he can get hot from 3, but we have seen the efficiency this season, and especially in the playoffs so far, just be really poor for him. And it seems a little bit unrealistic to expect him to turn it around. It's one thing, it's very much possible, conceivable, that he could, at least for a game or two, or maybe even, more, 3 to be specific, but of him to get hot from the three-point line and be able to will the Celtics. We've seen it from him in the past. Game 7 against the 76ers last year, putting up 51 in 2022. Game 6 against the Bucks on the road, when that was one of his best performances of his career. So it's again, something that is very much a possibility, but to expect him to do that is unrealistic in my eyes. And it just makes for an interesting conversation over the Celtics team of, especially when they don't seem to be taking it quite as seriously in the public, and that's the thing, is it's all about the public and what they are physically saying to reporters, knowing that it's going to get aggregated and such, that it is just really interesting to see how they have chosen to go about this. But at the same time, you still have the quotes from Tatum that he just said, it was either this morning or it was yesterday, about the idea of winning finals MVP. And he's, listed a number of players who, NBA greats more specifically, that were on all-time incredible teams and didn't end up winning finals MVP. That he expects them to be back for the future. It would be nice to win finals MVP on the biggest stage, but at the same time, winning the finals is the priority right now. So ultimately, I do feel like the maturity of Tatum and Brown and this overall team has shown enough to be reliable, but at the same time, I just thought it was very interesting, some of the comments that they made. But let me know in the comments section if you feel any differently. But we have, as much as this NBA Finals, again, it's a lot of intrigue within a 3-0 series lead, sparked by a massive Game 4 performance from the team that needed it. We have a very similar script going on in the NHL, with the Edmonton Oilers having a dominant win against the Florida Panthers over the weekend to keep their season alive. So we're going to be diving into all of the Game 4 action and where that series goes from here. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.